Good morning, West Shore. I am Judy Montgomery, your worship associate for today. We gather to worship, our hearts alive with hope that here we will be truly seen, that here we will be welcomed into the garden of this community, where the simple and the elegant, the fluted and the frilled, the shy and the dramatic complement one another and are treasured. May we know that here, each contributes in their way to the beauty of the whole. Come, let us worship together, all genders, sexualities, politics, clappers and non-clappers, progressive or conservative. May we root ourselves in the values of this faith. A special welcome to newcomers. If you are here in person, be sure to stop by the Welcome Center out in the hallway if you haven't already. If you've joined via the live stream, our membership and engagement coordinator, Diane Alcorn, would love to reach out to you, and so her contact information is being added to the chat. Please do see the e-news, which is sent to your inbox each week on Friday, to learn about events and activities happening in our community. As I scrolled through it again last night, I was just amazed at how much is going on here. A couple of announcements to highlight. This past January 23rd, Reverend McCarr preached his sermon entitled, "A Vision for Church-Based Justice Work." During the service, he invited people to engage this question of vision creatively by asking people to draw their vision of what social justice involves. The results were fascinating and inspiring. Come see them in the Fireside Room in an exhibit that will run until April 23rd. West Shore is a founding member of Greater Cleveland Congregations. Please consider attending a virtual GCC action this Thursday, April 7th at 7 p.m. Candidates for Cuyahoga County Executive and for a rare open juvenile court judge position will be there to answer questions from GCC and make commitments. Stop at the GCC table in the rotunda or see e-news for information and to register. We come together every week, bound not by a creed or a mutual desire to please one God or many gods, yet we are drawn together by a belief that how we are in the world, who we are together, matters. We light this chalice together in the knowledge that love, not fear, can change this world. Let us witness to the unity of our spirit by saying together our unison affirmation words. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio su ley. Este es nuestro magnífico convenio. Vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros.
We come to this good morning, remembering the journey of freedom. The land we are on was once another's. We mourn the legacies of oppression. Healing is our way forward. Joy is the birthright of all. Good morning, folks. Good to see you this morning. Now let us greet each other as feels mutually comfortable. If you like, you may include in your greeting a wave. At the folks at home, they will wave right back to you. Believe it. Believe it. Let's greet each other now. I got a frog in my throat.
Do you know if there's going to be a slide that has Okay, then I'm going to assume that it is. Because at first I was thinking, should I say what the words are? They'll be up there. So yeah, I'll just let them know kind of how the flow
And now, folks, we're going to have our first hymn of the day, led by Margaret and Brian Gardner. This is entitled Ella's Song, which was originally sung by Sweet Honey in the Rock. So please rise as you are willing and able, and Brian and Margaret are going to lead us in this hymn.
Yes, and we're going to need all of your help for the way this works. We're going to start off. Dave is going to play for us the melody for the chorus. We're going to sing it all together. Margaret and I will lead you three times at the start. We'll sing a little bit after that, and then we all join in at the end for another 3 more times. So, Dave, tell us how it goes.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
Let me hear it.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. Cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons, is as important as the killing of white men. White mother's sons. That which touches me most is that I had a chance to work with people, passing on to others that which was passed on to me.
Here we go now.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom
Many of you have heard the part of my story about how I came to West Shore, but I feel like a part of it needs to be told again. Though I was raised UU, I strayed for many years. In 2011, during a really challenging time of my life, I started attending a nearby United Church of Christ, partly because the minister was openly gay. Congregants marched in the Gay Pride Parade, and I was amazed that they put into action what they believed. I stayed for a year, mostly because I just felt so accepted there. Then they asked me to teach Sunday school. No. Unitarian Universalism may be similar to UUC in many ways, but they are definitely very Christian, and I'm not. I realized it was time to return to my roots. I came to West Shore in 2012 and discovered that West Shore not only marches in the Pride Parade, but we have straight allies who march as angels to protect us if there is any ugliness. There it is. Yeah. It almost always brings me to tears. I've been accused of being a bleeding heart liberal as if it was an insult. And here at West Shore, I found you were way ahead of me. You were liberals who cared about the well-being of other people in ways I hadn't yet thought about. You believed in taking care of the environment. You helped to feed hungry people. You were concerned about accessibility in our space. You wanted to help people who had been trafficked and abused. You were meeting with people from churches all over the city to have more impact on local political matters. You cared about and took action on behalf of marginalized populations. I had found my people. And then, in 2013, I accepted the opportunity to attend Beloved Conversations here at West Shore. I'd been in a white bubble all of my life, and there at Beloved Conversations, I began to understand that racism is so much more than obvious outward bigotry. I had thought that the simple answer to racism was acceptance of other people. At Beloved Conversations, I learned about my own privilege. I had been so oblivious. Until then, I hadn't heard about microaggressions, though I'm sure I'd been guilty of perpetrating some over the years. It was at Beloved Conversations that I met Shirley Nelson, who was co-facilitating the workshop. And she said one evening in the group, "Not a day goes by without experiencing at least one microaggression." That hit me really hard. To hear her talk about experiencing daily pain because of white ignorance. I began to understand the subtlety and the pervasiveness of racism. If you didn't take a look at the table of microaggressions that was part of the order of service last week, I encourage you to do so. And that table was also sent attached to your e-news on Friday. I began to be aware of the times that I have uncomfortable thoughts, like the times I've seen groups of boys walking around town. If they're all black, I'm aware that I feel differently than if they're all white. Rather than beat myself up, I acknowledge those thoughts and awarenesses and think, wow, there is my indoctrination at work. Although it's painful, I am also grateful to be aware of those thoughts and not oblivious anymore. I want to continue to become aware of my biases and those at play in our church and our communities. I don't want to be that white lady who means well. How are we at West Shore unintentionally off-putting to visitors or even other members? I'm not just talking about race. Where are we guilty of ageism, ableism? Where are we not as supportive as we could be around mental health, class? Where could we be listening better? Recently, I bought a book called The Black UU Survival Guide, 10 Steps for Surviving as a Black Unitarian Universalist, and how allies can keep it 100. How sad that someone, a minister, felt it necessary to share what he'd learned to help others survive in our faith. And also, what does keep it 100 mean? I had to look it up. It means the daily intentional effort to grow and maintain healthy relationships with others, and also being dedicated to a lifestyle of integrity. Sounds very UU, doesn't it? If we in the UU world were really living the 7 principles, the 8th might not be necessary. But seeing this book makes me know we really need the 8th principle. And once we are living all 8 principles, we'll be keeping it 100.
Let us now enter into a time of prayer and meditation. We do so mindful of this past Thursday, March 31st, which marked the 13th Annual International Transgender Day of Visibility. The day is dedicated to celebrating the accomplishments and victories of trans and gender nonconforming people while raising awareness of the work still needed to save trans lives. As a trans activist says, being transgender, like being gay, tall, short, white, black, male, or female, is another part of the human condition that makes each individual unique and something over which we have no control. We are who we are in the deepest recesses of our minds, hearts, and identities. And now you are invited to write something down that expresses your heart, a need, a hope, a hurt, something you are thankful for. Prayer cards are available to you in the pew in front of you, the yellow cards. What you write will be held in confidence, and if you request a follow-up, I or a member of our pastoral care team will reach back out to you. Once you're done, hold on to your card. You will place it in the offering basket when it goes around. So I'll give you just a couple of moments with your card. And now, if you will, hold your card up high. These are the sorrows and joys of our hearts, which I will take into my meditations this week and pray for all that is our life. For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad.
Good morning. I'm Carol Sweet, and I'm part of the Jubilee Pledge team, along with Karen Kircher, Judith Janes, and Danny Danchuk. Our theme in this Jubilee year is building across the generations for the next 75 years, as we recognize the generous gifts of the past that have kept West Shore strong, and while building the foundation for our future. I'd like to share a personal story about something your pledges have made possible just this past month. An idea, sparked by a request, has resulted in a new group at West Shore called Finding Joy After Loss. In the words of Diane Alcorn, this was an ask by both a guest and a member that were looking for community after losing a spouse. They asked, and it happened. The group formed to support those that have lost a spouse or partner, and I would personally like to thank and acknowledge Diane and the ladies that worked to make this happen. Marilyn Wesky, Deborah Kuhn, and Mimi Mayer and Vicki Warden. As a widow myself, it was the joy in the name of this group that really got my attention. Finding joy in life in the midst of grief has been a focus of my life for the last 10 years. And being in a group with this shared perspective was really something that I wanted to be a part of. We recently had our first meeting with Reverend Mary Gregolia facilitating, and we will be meeting monthly. So if this speaks to your heart and you want to participate, please reach out to Diane Alcorn. I think this is a great example of the church providing support with life events and meeting the needs of its members. And it's, again, your pledges that make this possible. So to provide you with an update on our current pledge drive, 72 pledges have been received in the amount of $256,000. And those same pledge units have increased the amount of their pledges by 6% compared to last year. I encourage you to check out the tree in the rotunda that displays our progress. The tree was created during the brunch on March 20th, when members of the church added fruits to represent the gifts of the past and leaves with wishes for our future. We're now adding birds to the tree, and each bird represents $25,000 pledged. So as of this week, we're up to 10 birds as we work towards our pledge goal of 25 birds, or $625,000. Please make your pledge this week and help us reach our goal. There's a sign-up sheet at the Jubilee table in the rotunda if you'd like to receive a call from the office to help make your pledge, or also if you need any assistance to complete your service auction payment. We also have mugs and totes for sale and raffle tickets to win an Easter basket. The proceeds from these will go towards an end-of-the-year celebration. So thank you all for your time and your continued generosity. Yes, just to repeat what Marilyn said, the Finding Joy After Loss group is open to both widows and widowers. So please reach out if you'd like to be a part of that. Thank you.
Some love. Y'all show her some love. Thank you, Carol. Thank you for your testimony. Today's offering will now be given and gratefully received. If you have been following our Reading the Bible Again for the First Time sermon series this year, you know that we have spent significant time with the story of the ancient Israelites and how they became enslaved in the land of Egypt. Through God's might and with the leadership of Moses, they escaped. And after 40 years of wandering the desert, they entered into a new land, a promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, where they might reestablish themselves as a society of justice and fairness, the likes of which up to that point in human history the world had never seen. The possibility of that was absolutely theirs to grasp. It could have happened, but it did not. The tragedy of this ancient journey towards wholeness is that the parts lost sight of the whole, which is the justice and fairness for all goal. And by parts, I mean people. The people lost sight. The people forgot. Fear and greed made the people turn on each other. Some people established systems of oppression that harmed other people. And then one generation after another passed until those oppressive systems, which had originally been established through a great deal of violence and bloodshed, well, they became a comfortable backdrop for some. A comfortable living situation for some, but for others, it became a daily source of punishment and humiliation. Specifically for the ancient Israelites, once they reestablished themselves in the promised land, they created a system of monarchy that echoed the situation they had just left a few decades earlier at great cost, that of the Egyptian pharaohs. But the Israelites were tired. They just wanted someone to tell them what to do, and a kingship seemed to be the best way forward. Biblical prophet after biblical prophet warned them, do not do this, warned them that oppression would return to the land. But the parts lost sight of the whole. What was it that writer William Faulkner once said about the past? The past is never dead. It's not even past. 400 plus years ago, Europeans left all they knew to come to America, and the thought was ever before them that it was their turn to accomplish what the ancient Israelites had ultimately failed to do, to enter into promised land and establish themselves as a true society of justice and fairness. They spoke of a city on the hill. From them, we receive the distinctly American vision of, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet, the writer of these words was a slaveholder. America was built on the genocide of Native Americans. It was built on the backs of slaves. Hundreds of years of slavery, morphing into 80 plus years of Jim Crow segregation, resulting in social arrangements around education, law enforcement, employment, housing, health care, and so on, that even to this day tell a big lie about people who are not white, that they do not matter, that they are not worthy. Still, right now, white supremacy is the very comfortable background of life for some, but for others it is a daily source of humiliation and violence and death. It is yet another example of the tragedy of the journey towards wholeness, the parts losing sight of the whole. And now here we are, having a conversation about a possible addition to our 7 Unitarian Universalist principles, the proposed 8th principle, which goes like this: journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. In this sermon, I propose to do several things. Number 1, suggest some basic insights about the principles to lay the groundwork for everything else that follows. Number 2, to describe the extent of the changes that the UUA Board of Trustees has charged the Article 2 Study Commission to consider. Number 3, to focus on the specific content of the proposed 8th principle. And number 4, to draw on the UUA's Widening the Circle of Concern report to suggest what some of the consequences of adopting the 8th principle might be. But in everything that is said, in everything, let us not forget the ancestors are with us in this room right now. The ancestors are with us. The ones who believed in the journey towards wholeness, but were flawed. The ancestors who urge us to learn from their mistakes and do better today, to be people parts, who don't lose track of the whole, who don't get distracted, who keep their eyes diligently on the prize of wholeness. It is true, the past is never dead. It is not even past. But learning from the past is always possible. There can be evolution. We are not condemned to repeat history, though we must work hard to know that history and to not flinch from whatever complicity we might have in its harshest moments. So begin with a basic insight about the nature of our Unitarian Universalist principles, which are housed in Article 2 of the Unitarian Universalist Association bylaws. The insight is this: our principles define the wholeness that we, the parts, ideally journey towards. Such wholeness can be possible for everyone if the parts work together to make it so. And because the parts can lose sight of the whole, history holds ample proof of that. The principles need to be very clear and very memorable, ideally unforgettable, written on our hearts and our minds. In this respect, our principles are a little like the 10 Commandments. They're a little like the 10 Commandments, our UUA version of that. They really are, except in one big respect. Whereas the 10 Commandments are supposed to stay the same forever, our Unitarian Universalist principles are meant to evolve. It is sound Unitarian Universalist theology to see our understanding of truth as evolving. As preeminent 20th century theologian James Luther Adams once said, "Revelation is continuous." We call our religion a living tradition because we are always learning more about our world. Changing social conditions require us to change the understanding we bring to them. And so our principles have changed over time. One major moment of change was inspired by the feminist movement of the 1960s and 70s, together with a broadening acceptance of the theological diversity among us. Our living tradition was learning the hard way, that when we do not prioritize the welfare and the wisdom of women in our midst, when we do not prioritize the pluralism in our midst, we shoot ourselves in the foot. We shoot ourselves in the foot. We therefore had to create new principles that would help us bring us the parts of us back again to a renewed vision of wholeness, to work towards that evolved vision of wholeness. And so in 1985, a new set of principles was developed. But revelation is continuous. Several years later, it became clear that we needed to bring in from the margins the priority of earth-based spirituality, and this led to another change made in 1995. Now, I do not want to suggest that these changes are taken lightly or are easy to make. Every change to Article 2 of the UUA bylaws, remember, that's where the principles are housed. Every change is major and takes years and tons of effort to accomplish, and the consequences are just across the board. Here's just one example. If you open up your gray hymn book, you will see our current purposes and principles statement around 5 pages in. You got to flip past 5 pages, roughly speaking. It's right before hymn number 1. If and when we change this statement, well, what does it mean? Are we going to need new hymnals? Or maybe we're all going to get stickers, a sticker to cover up the old principles, right? So we've got the correct principles in our hymnals. What about the poster that hangs up near the door to the church, right? Do you know about that poster? What about all the materials that we use in our RE classes for all ages? All of that stuff gets impacted. This change impacts everything, down to the details. That is what I am trying to say. There is nothing simple about a change to our principles. But you know, if we must, we must. If we must, we must. Which takes us to the next part of this sermon, the extent of the changes that the UUA Board of Trustees has charged the Article 2 Study Commission to consider. The Article 2 Study Commission, which is composed of 6 people, was convened by the UUA Board in the fall of 2020 to be the group that would lead the review process, the revision process, the group that would ultimately present a new version of the principles to the Board of Trustees in January of 2023. That is when this is supposed to happen, January 2023, for its consideration. In turn, the board will place the new principles on the 2023 General Assembly business agenda for the consideration of all. To this end, the UUA board said to the study commission, and I quote, "You are charged with reviewing all sections of Article 2, and you are free to revise, replace, or restructure them as needed to meet the objectives stated above." More about that in a moment. There is nothing, they go on to say, there is nothing sacred about the number of principles or sources, nor their specific wordings, nor in the way that Article 2 is laid out. In other words, the study commission's end product could feature 15 principles, 50 principles, 5 principles. I mean, I know today we are talking about adopting an 8th principle, but when, after all is said and done, we might not end up with 8. Does that make sense? Do y'all see what I mean? Straight from the charge of the UUA Board of Trustees. Now, besides this invitation to a wide open process, the UUA Board had things to say about what they wanted the form of the principles to look like. They said to that study commission, "We recognize that one steady criticism over decades has been that the language of the principles is not poetic. We encourage the commission to consider framings of our principles that allow them to be brief and poetic." And then they go on to say, perhaps by transferring explanatory clauses and expansions to a subsidiary document that expounds on what the commission sees as included and intended in that shorter form. Hearing this, perhaps one concern about the proposed eighth principle, that it is extremely wordy in comparison to the other principles, maybe that concern is diffused. It looks like the UUA board wants the overall statement of the principles to be poetic and brief. It may mean that the language of the eighth principle, the proposed one, is modified accordingly. Finally, the UUA board spoke directly to content changes, and one is of course related to anti-racism and anti-oppression. And I quote, "Our commitment to anti-racism, anti-oppression, and multiculturalism is love in action and should be centered in any revision of Article 2. Echoing this and adding to it is the observation made in the Widening the Circle of Concern report, where it says, despite periodic and episodic attempts to address racism and to address personal bias, we, as the association and as churches, have not sustained these efforts and now find that many of our congregational practices are lacking in the standards of multicultural competency found in many workplaces." Now note the implication of that last part. How, if we do not center the priority of multicultural competency, the world is going to pass us by. The world is going to pass us by. Prioritizing anti-racism and anti-oppression is not just the right thing to do, it is the pragmatic thing to do. But note that this is not the only content change that the UUA board is looking for. The UUA board also said to the study commission, number one, love is a central value for UUs. Justice is what love looks like in public, they said, quoting Dr. Cornel West. So, the next version of the principles ought to center the priority of the loving liberation of all. Number two, we speak of the inherent worth and dignity of all people, but are we not shooting ourselves in the foot if in this time of climate change and eco-catastrophe we do not prioritize the inherent worth and dignity of all beings? And number three, finally, the board said that it is time to revisit the 6 sources. My personal interpretation of this is a concern with listing just 6 specific sources, when in reality, far more are in play. The board seems like it is wanting a radical revision of this part of Article 2. When it says this, and I quote, "We particularly urge the Commission to review the sources." So, this is the full picture of what is happening with the Study Commission's work on evolving our Unitarian Universalist principles. The commitment is to reimagining the vision of wholeness that we are lifting up so that our spiritual journeys are headed in the right direction for the world as it is today. Part of this does indeed relate to anti-racism and anti-oppression, but there is a lot more involved. So let's keep this larger context in mind as now we hone in on the proposed 8th principle itself and its specific content. Again, here is the language. Journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. One of the ways this statement seems, at least to me, categorically different from the other 7 principles is that nowhere in those other 7 principles is an acknowledgement of personal ownership of injustice. Justice, equity, and compassion. Peace, liberty, and justice for all. Respect for the interdependent web of all existence. Such language fills our 7 principles, and so do their implied reversals: injustice, unfairness, lack of empathy, war-making, tyranny, disrespect for the interdependent web. And my point is this: the 7 principles, the way they are written currently, my opinion, makes it easy to project all of these implied reversals onto other people. But what about our own injustice, our own unfairness, our own lack of empathy, and so on? What about the religious duty of holding ourselves accountable for the ways we personally screw up? Jesus once said, "Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye but do not notice the log in your own eye?" It is spiritually healthy to make the searching of one's own heart for one's own biases and vices a priority. And only the proposed 8th principle explicitly names this, when it names racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Furthermore, note the language of accountability in this proposed 8th principle. The idea is that in this interdependent web of all existence, we live not just for ourselves or for our family or for our preferred friendship circles and community. As the song says so beautifully, our world is one world. The thoughts we think affect us all. The way we build our attitudes with love or hate we make a bridge or wall. But in particular, what about the folks in our communities and our world who are most oppressed and most worst off? Shall they not be prioritized when decisions are being made? As the Widening the Circle of Concern report says, just as we can understand that the current paradigm of white dominance centers white identity and the comfort of white identified people, we can also understand that a more just and effective system would center the comfort, safety, growth, agency, and capacity of self-realization of those who are currently most oppressed, which would end up as a benefit for all. Accountability means that we must ask, how will this decision impact those whom the world marginalizes, the least of these, as Jesus once said? Accountability thus means that the journey towards wholeness can at times be uncomfortable for folks who benefit from the status quo. Therefore, courage is essential. Courage to reject the temptation of hiding in privileged enclaves. Courage to keep showing up to church where the learning process is uncovering unconscious biases and things you didn't know you did not know. And that is not easy. And you're here today and you're showing up. Thank you. Thank you for showing up today. It's about courage. And courage is also needed by those who endure every day of their lives the cuts of microaggressions and the threats of living in a world that is a danger to them. Courage for these people to keep showing up to church too, and to never stop believing that this can truly be a beloved community for them too. There's lots of content to the 8th principle, but my time is quickly running to an end. I will say one more thing about content and then turn to a few brief thoughts about what the adoption of this principle might mean. Here is the one more thing. The phrase is racism and other oppressions. I am noticing in many conversations about this proposed principle that often the phrase gets shortened simply to racism. I hear that, and it concerns me greatly. Our social and political identities are interconnected in all sorts of ways, and the result is, as Kimberly Crenshaw says, a many-layered blanket of oppression. If all we are talking about is racism, then we are not on the journey towards wholeness. And we will not be able to show up in the way that the world needs us to show up to the world and to each other. We got to read Bell Hooks. We got to read Kimberly Crenshaw and others. These black women are leading the way. At the very least, if we do not understand what it means to be middle class and how that intersects with race, then we Unitarian Universalists can never act in a way that is truly accountable. And now finally, what might the adoption of the proposed eighth principle lead to? Well, for the association at large, it could mean any number of significant changes. As the Widening the Circle of Concern report says, we have an overly complex and confusing denominational system which needs to be streamlined. General Assembly, the annual business meeting of the association, is very expensive to go to, and therefore it prevents a genuine democratic representation of all of our churches. The role of the president of the association is problematic. And then there is the lack of multicultural skills in regional staff and good offices people, and this only exacerbates conflicts pretty much throughout the association and our churches. As for individual congregations, the Widening the Circle of Concern report says that one significant area of concern is, and I quote, over-reliance on informal structures to carry out leadership work. The report goes on to say, informal structures rely on social relationships and thus tend to privilege people from the dominant culture in a community or organization. In the interest of not being bureaucratic, we leave structures informal because, well, we all know and trust each other. In other words, what the report is saying is that if we do not have clear structures for how leadership happens in a congregation, if we do not have clear entry points for participation in decision making, well, only the folks who are already on the inside can exert power. The same old thing happens over and over again because it's the same old people making the decisions, and nobody knows how to get on the inside because the rules of the road are pretty ill-defined. That's the problem. That's the tyranny of informality. Some people call it power hoarding. Now, moving on, let me ask this. Has West Shore ever had an equity, inclusion, and diversity audit? Has it ever happened? An effort to get just a sense of the entirety of the congregation, looking through the prism of equity, inclusion, diversity. Has it ever happened? I'm looking at some of the people who might know. Kind of move your body, or I don't know. That's something we might want to think about. If you take a look at the anti-racism, anti-oppression timeline in your order of service, this is my best effort, all right? And as I acknowledge, there may be stuff missing, I might have gotten something wrong, but this timeline at least brings us up to the present moment. If you take a look at it, you're going to see lots that's happened over the years. I just want everyone to see how much has happened around the area of AROMAC, anti-racism, anti-oppression, multiculturalism, ever since 2008. There's a lot more that predates that, but we're starting here with 2008. You will notice on that timeline that we have been doing all of this stuff without having endorsed an eighth principle or something like that. The board established anti-racism, anti-oppression, and multiculturalism as a congregational priority back in 2008. How many years ago was that? I'm not good with mathematics, that's what I'm really trying to say, so could you please help? It's like 14 years ago? That's why I'm a minister, not a rocket scientist. It was back in 2008, 14 years ago. And 14 years ago, they created a diversity change team charged to manage, and I quote, to manage and monitor our institutional work in fulfilling the end of becoming an anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and multicultural congregation, unquote. But now, here we are in 2022, and for this congregation to endorse the proposed eighth principle, here's how I see it. What it will do is to send a mandate message that we are not done with this work, that it is time to re-engage it, perhaps with redoubled passion and commitment. Although when I count up the number of workshops that people have gone to and the book reads, I don't know how to redouble that. Seriously, that's almost 40 workshops over the course of 14 years. And I mean, but it means something. It means a mandate message that we want to recommit to this work. And I would say first and foremost, this work that we recommit to is a matter of remembering all that has taken place since 2008 at least, and to take account of the lessons learned, to organize ourselves for greater effectiveness. We are not stupid people. 40 workshops is 40 workshops. What are we learning from that? What worked for us in the past 14 years? How can we restructure things moving forward? Learn the lessons learned. If we commit ourselves to the eighth principle, it's a commitment to truly understand that we are indeed on this journey towards wholeness together, and we need to pull together perhaps in ways we've never done before because we didn't know. We're learning as we go. I want to share with you a quote from the Reverend Sophia Betancourt when she addressed the General Assembly in 2018 as the Service of the Living Traditions preacher, one of the most prestigious things to be able to do in our association. She said, poet and prophet Audre Lorde told those embarking on a next great journey that it was their small actions, their everyday decisions, and how they moved through this world that not only gave them power, but would redefine our future. She did not offer them a great redeeming moment. She simply steered them back to the daily struggle, to what might be called faithful living. And I commend these words wholeheartedly to you this day. This congregation's adoption of the eighth principle would be important. It would be an important mandate message about what our priorities are and our vision of the future. But let us not see it as some great redeeming moment, as though the mere adoption of the principle were somehow the end of the work, that we were somehow done. It's just a way station. It's just a gut check. For me, it would be a celebration. It would be a confirmation. And then we get right back to the daily struggle of faithful living. We get right back to the continuing journey towards wholeness. We get right back to our ancestors and honoring them by knowing their history and absorbing the lessons learned. We do what Maya Angelou says. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. Can I hear an amen? Amen. 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 Let's sing our closing hymn, number 1015, I Know I Can. Please rise, in body or in spirit.
Please join me in saying our chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish our flames, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us until we meet again.
Please join us at noon in the chapel for a special sermon chat. We will be joined by our 8th Principal Task Force, and I will facilitate our going deeper into the 8th Principle and this process that I've just described in my sermon. And now our benediction words, they come to us from actor and transgender activist Laverne Cox. Y'all know Laverne Cox? What is it, Orange is the New Black? Something like that. It's a great show. She says, believing you are unworthy of love and belonging, that who you are authentically is a sin or is wrong. That is deadly, she says. Who you are is beautiful and amazing. She says, by doing the work to love ourselves more, I believe we will love each other better. So may it be, right? Ashe and amen. So may it be.